Stand by for Bawana.org radio. In 3, 2, 1. Cue the announcer.
You found Bawana.org radio, your one source for tech news and reviews. Now, almost live from sunny Florida, here's your host, Bawana McCall.
Greetings, folks, and welcome to episode 252 of Bawana.org radio. And I thank everybody for coming by and listening to the show. Wow, feels good to get one under your belt when you're doing a comeback. Episode 251 was met with a resounding positive feedback. Everybody was very happy that Bawana.org radio has returned. And I appreciate all the feedback. I appreciate all the kind words. And hopefully I can make the show better than it was in the past, better than what you remember. So I'm always striving to improve things, which is why I haven't gone live yet. If I want to do something again in a comeback form, if you've been following my shows, you know that I try to do it better, try to do it a little bit different. So the same is true for Bawana.org radio. Today is October 23rd, 2012. If that date sounds familiar to you, it should, because it's been all over the tech news that today is iPad mini day. That's right. We're going to cover that on top of a ton of other stories. When I say ton, I mean a handful. Only like 5 to 6 stories. But the Apple stuff definitely dominated today's top news. And there were some surprises. There's some things that we expected, but a few surprises and some perplexing things by the folks out there at Apple. So stay tuned for a great show, guys. Bawana.org radio 252 coming at you right now.
It's time for Bawana.org radio's tech news for this week.
And for our first story, we're going to talk about AMD. AMD, which is known for making their chips, processors, and video cards. They acquired the ATI company, so if you have an AMD video card, you know what I'm talking about. This is the Radeon line of cards, and mobile devices have a lot of Radeon chips. AMD has had a very, very disappointing Q3, as they have announced layoffs after disappointing Q3 results. They delivered these results on October 18th, and their GAAP revenue came in at $1.27 billion, which is a 10% decline from the last quarter, and a significant 25% decrease from the same time last year. They have an operating loss of $131 million and a net loss of $157 million, which equates to a loss per share of 21 cents. That is pretty bad for AMD. And they, as a result of these bad announcements, have announced that they're going to lay off 15% of the workforce, as well as consolidate their factories, if you will. Their work sites is what this article over on /gear.com is calling them. Very, very, very bad for AMD. Now, personally me, in case you didn't know who personally was referring to. Personally, I'm an Intel guy. Intel NVIDIA guy. I have been for a long time. I just stand by their products. I'm very, very happy with what I've done in terms of selection of chips, motherboards, and video cards. My experiences have been great. I've had less than stellar experiences with AMD products, but I don't hold off on recommending them to people quite often. I often share my bad experiences with others so that they can interpret it as they will. Because just because I have a bad experience with the product doesn't mean you will. But apparently in Q3, a lot of other people felt that AMD wasn't the way to go. And it's sad that a lot of people are going to lose their jobs. And I imagine some people are going to have to either relocate or lose their jobs, because when you talk about consolidating work sites, that means some factories and some offices are going to close. So things are not looking good for the guys over at AMD. Check it out, guys. Over on /gear.com, AMD announces layoffs after a disappointing Q3 result. And speaking of AMD, as a result of those disappointing Q3 results, one analyst, as this story over on arstechnica.com discusses, has called them, and I quote, un-investable. Un-investable. That means that they are not investable. This is an analyst talking to people who would possibly invest in AMD, saying that they are uninvestable. And this is very, very daunting. I just recall the previous story that I talked about with AMD and their losses. This is his quote. This is Bernstein's research, Stacy Raskin. And he writes, "Our last tiny bit of conviction is at long last depleted. We have no further confidence that any aspect of our prior structural thesis, margin accretion, cash flow, and balance sheet deleveraging will play out in the foreseeable future." He's referring to AMD. Here's the kicker, according to Ars Technica. He says, "Frankly, the most common adjective that comes up when we discuss the company with clients is simply uninvestable." So that is a harsh thing to say about any company, because you always want to have a glimmer of hope. There's always a plan. There's always something to look forward to. There's always something in the pipeline. There's always something in R&D. There's always something that is a glimmer of hope. This analyst says that last bit of light is gone. Our last tiny bit of conviction, the last bit of it is gone. We can't save this company. It's uninvestable. So in essence, he's advising everybody to sell. Don't invest. Not good for AMD. They're going to cut 1,800 jobs. Again, like I said, 15% of their global workforce. Their stock has already dropped 16%. Their CFO resigned abruptly last month. That's their chief financial officer. Just say, okay, I'm out of here. Bye. Not good for AMD, guys. And it's sad because when you look at things from a technical perspective, you kind of want to have some competition. We don't want Intel and NVIDIA to rule everything, do we? There always has to be another side of that equation when we talk about this thing called, capitalism. You want competition to drive down prices and to encourage innovation. Otherwise, it may get stagnant because people get comfortable in their success. We want AMD not to fail, guys. That's the point. Even though I don't use AMD, even though I don't like their products personally, I don't want them to fail, and I don't want people to lose their jobs. And that's essentially what's happening here. That's what this analyst is saying. And he's not, it really is no future for the company. In his words, uninvestable means there's no future for the company. If you're investing in a company, that means that you believe that there's some future, that there's something coming that will help. And he's saying that there's no future to this company. Terrible, harsh words. Do you agree, though? Do you agree that AMD's in a spot to where they can't get out of? Do you agree that AMD's products aren't worth investing your hard-earned money in? Because AMD's attributing this to, lesser spending by consumers. How many of you upgraded your PCs in the last couple of months? In the last year, in the last quarter? Was it an AMD product? It's a good question, right? 150 million loss in Q3. AMD's prospects look grim. Check it out, guys. Over on arstechnica.com, they got the details. Now let's talk about Amazon. Amazon and the cloud. The cloud is a buzzword used by tons of companies, including mine, my employer, HP. It's all about the cloud. And there's a lot of incentive to move to the cloud. A lot of companies are taking their applications and their and their infrastructure to the cloud. Yesterday, October 22nd, 2012, Amazon suffered another outage. And when I mean Amazon, I'm talking about their cloud services, which a lot of companies use. You really don't know who's using Amazon until your favorite website's not available. So if you use a site like Reddit, or if you use something like Netflix, or if you use something like Flipboard, GitHub, Minecraft, you play Minecraft, right? Chances are you were affected by yesterday's outage. And it wasn't a quick outage. It was fairly lengthy. Here's a quote from Amazon. It says, today's outage appears to be centered, well, not a quote, but today's outage appears to be centered around their EC2 operations, with Amazon's status for the area flipped to performance issues. So apparently these performance issues caused the sites to go down. Other companies that were affected were Pinterest, Fast Company, Foursquare, and others. Tons of sites are using Amazon for their services. And apparently they're relying on them solely. Now, Amazon has went down in the past, and a lot of people stated that, hey, this is kind of a wake-up call. Hey, maybe you need a contingency plan. Not going to really knock Amazon because they offer great services. But if you're a client, or if you're a business or a service and you're trying to serve something over the internet, relying on, when there's a dollar amount, especially if there's a dollar amount associated with, like with Netflix, people are paying for this stuff. And you're relying on a single site. And if that site goes down, you're down. There's something wrong with that picture. You need a contingency plan. You need a backup plan. You need a web server somewhere else, available on standby, with another provider that could be turned on at any moment. Now, that may sound expensive, but I bet you they would trade off that expense for what happened yesterday. Now, I'm mainly looking at sites like Netflix, because their customers are upset. If you're a Netflix customer and you're paying for the service and you can't watch a movie, you got a beef. You got a gripe. You have a valid gripe with the service. So cloud, while is very, very attractive, saves a lot of money on infrastructure, very convenient, fairly cheap for what you're getting, I don't think it should be a sole mechanism for your service. That's my opinion. And I don't represent the values or views of HP when I say this. This is all coming from Buana. I really think you should consider having a backup plan. I'm old school like that. You need a contingency plan. Single points of failure are kind of foolish. But these sites are relying on Amazon completely. And, they trust the site so much. Just like people, that's why I can't get around this whole living with your digital life online. With everything you own, like your music, your photos, your movies, your everything, your email, your calendar, everything's in the cloud. And once the cloud is inaccessible, you're left standing looking crazy. That's why I can't get behind these devices like the Chromebook and these cloud devices, if you will, these cloud OSs. I can't get behind them because of that. Now, Buana, you're just old-fashioned. Well, yeah, I am. And I believe that it would be smart of individuals to consider that in their day-to-day usage of their CPUs and of their businesses, because stuff like this happens. And it's going to happen again. To say, if Amazon were to say to their customers, this won't happen again, is stupid. It will happen again. It will. And it may even be worse. It may not even be a day. It may be a couple weeks. If your site goes down for a couple weeks, what are you going to do? You're going to say, Amazon, hurry up, fix it. Or are you going to go to a contingency plan and have your site up on another place, another site, your own servers? your own data centers. Something to think about. Check it out, guys. This is over on slashgear.com. Are you behind this cloud thing completely? I know I'm not. I appreciate the cloud, but I don't rely on it solely because that's just foolish.
You're listening to Bawana.org Radio, a potpourri of tech news and reviews.
Now let's talk about Twitter. Twitter. If you guys have used Twitter in the past, or even now, you probably have that favorite application or way of accessing Twitter. It could be their website, twitter.com. It could be an application like the official Twitter application, or it could be something like Tweetbot, which we're going to talk about. It's a very, very popular application for Twitter. These third-party apps. And recently I've noticed that a lot of my stuff's been breaking when it comes to Twitter. Number one, my notifications from my twitch.tv gaming stream, they just stopped working. They don't notify people on my dedicated Twitter account, my Bawana Live account. They don't notify people anymore. Just stopped working. If you go to Bawana.tv or Bawana.org, you notice that I have my latest tweet embedded on the website. That just up and stopped working. So things are just breaking left and right, and this is a result of Twitter's new API, which is hurting third-party apps. And we're going to talk about Tweetbot specifically today on this topic because the application has a price now of $20. And I don't have the original price. I think it might have been $4.99 before, or it might have even been free. But the app now is $20. Actually, it was, no, the original, no. Okay, I'm reading this wrong. It is $20 now. I don't have the original price. And this is solely because of these new API changes that Twitter has announced. Now, back in August, they announced a potentially crippling set of changes to their API. And I wasn't around to talk about this on Bawana.org Radio, but among these changes was a general prohibition against apps that mimic or reproduce the mainstream consumer client experience. The apps have to be certified by Twitter, with terms of that certification being unknown. And you have a limitation of 100,000 users per app, enforced by handing out per user tokens using OAuth. Now, the 100K user can be negotiated, and it leaves the number of users basically in Twitter's hands. So in essence, Twitter can choke your growth. Twitter can say, you got too many users. We can't support that. Sorry. We've given you a cap. So Tweetbot has been forced to raise the price of their app because I would imagine they're being limited by Twitter. Not only by requests, but by users. Huh. It's very, very expensive in terms of Twitter clients. $20 is very expensive. I don't think any Twitter client has ever been that high. It's crazy. But these guys over at Ars Technica, they talk with the developers, and this is a quote from the developers. It says, I actually don't think we're competing with any free apps right now. Twitter for Mac has from all appearances been abandoned. Echophone for Mac has been officially discontinued. TweetDeck is targeting a totally different set of users, and their app is more of a web app than a Mac app. Again, Tweetbot is for OS X. The original Tweety for Mac was $19.95 and was launched at $14.95. And if you look at the list of top grossing apps on the list, it's very hard to find anything that's under $20. So he's kind of justifying the price. It's kind of crazy that Twitter would go this route. I don't even know. And this is another quote from the things about the tokens, about the number of users. This is from Paul what's his last name? Paul Haddad. He says there's a lot of confusion over this, and by this he means the 100K users. The actual rule is any app that didn't have 100K tokens in use as of August 16th only gets 100K tokens. Any app that had over 100K tokens in use gets twice their value. We had over 100K tokens in use for our alpha at the time of the announcement. So he's saying that they had over 100K. So they actually get 200K. Huh. So he's trying to be polite. I mean, he's saying that their developer relations group is very helpful and we work closely with them. I'll also say that they haven't changed their guidance from the original August 16th post, and I don't believe they will. But you got to think this is pretty hard for them. That they're being controlled by Twitter. And third-party developers are jumping shit. And I recently became part of another network called app.net. I don't know if you guys have seen it. It is essentially a Twitter clone, but it's 256 characters and it's very, very developer-friendly. One of the most developer-friendly environments I've ever seen. And they've gone with a monetization approach there. Basically, they've eliminated advertising from everything. You'll see no sponsored tweets. You'll see no advertising anywhere because you pay up front for the service. You're essentially paying. And developers are charging for their apps. And people are buying the apps for a very, very cohesive and smooth experience. I don't think I've ever seen a Twitter-like experience like this. Very fast. Always works. Easy to use. You know, whenever there's an up-and-coming environment on a new social network, everybody's nice. So that's a plus. But it's a $5 a month type thing or a $36 a year type thing that you have to pay for. Is this the future? You got to ask yourself, is this the future of where apps are going to be going on the internet? It's the past. That's for sure. We used to have to pay for everything until advertising took over everything. And people now demand things are free and immediately frown when they have to pay. Oh, but they'll frown at the ads and say, I'm going to install ad block, but I still want that content for free. And the developer of the apps don't get any money. The developer of the websites don't get any money. You're sitting back giggling using their product for free and think it's okay. Problem is, it's not okay. It is a service. It costs money and you're not paying for it. So it's not okay. So I'm a big fan of paying for a service that's good. I'm willing to pay for it. I am. And I asked some people about app.net before I joined. I was like, is it good? You know, give me some opinions. I'm basically trying it for 1 month. I dropped $5 and said, okay, I'm going to sacrifice a cup of coffee this month and drop $5 on this site and see what it's all about. And it's been a pleasurable experience. I've since bought 2 apps, or I bought 1 app and downloaded a free app on my phone. One called Felix and the other one called iRiver. Felix is a joy to use. Twitter can learn a lot from Felix. Any mobile app on the iPhone can learn a lot from Felix. It's a great experience. So Twitter is pushing developers away, guys. That's the point I'm trying to make. They're pushing developers away. And it's getting worse and worse and worse. And Twitter's getting more and more commercial. You're noticing if you go to Twitter, there's more and more sponsored tweets littering your timeline. Whereas third-party apps would filter that stuff out. Oh, not anymore, because Twitter's basically pushing them out. There's a lot of advertising everywhere. And like I said, I don't mind paying for a good service. You know, I don't mind the ads. What I do mind is this policy that they have against these developers. And they're essentially pushing them out. And the developers are what helped build Twitter. Without third-party developers, Twitter would not be where it is today. Without a shadow of a doubt. Nobody can refute that. Without third-party developers, Twitter would not be as big as it is now. And they're kicking them to the curb. So, you know, you want to abandon Twitter. You want to say, oh, forget you, Twitter. I'm going to go over here to app.net forever. I hate you forever. Oh, I don't like you. But that's not going to happen. If you're serious about your business, if you're serious about your website, if you're serious about your podcast, your videos, your YouTube, you're going to embrace Twitter. You're going to connect with your fan base. But at the same time, I just can't sit back and say, hey, this is right, because it's not. I really think Twitter should reconsider this, but they haven't, and it doesn't look like they're going to. Check it out, guys. Over on arstechnica.com, they got the details. Tweetbot for OS X, $20 now as a result of Twitter's new policies. Now let's talk about Apple. Let's talk about today's event. I streamed this today at live.buona.tv. We covered the Apple October event, as I'm going to call it. Some people were calling it the iPad mini event, and I was too before it happened. Now I'm calling it something different because a lot more than the iPad mini was announced. So today, Apple has announced quite a few changes, quite a few refreshes. Number one, they talked about all their sales numbers. This is like standard for any keynote from Apple, anybody. They're like, oh, we sold 100 million this, 100 million that, blah, 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 blah. Some of the numbers that really stood out to me was that there are 200 million iOS devices, iOS 6 devices. This is the newest OS. 200 million. Now, I don't know the total, number of devices out there. I got to imagine that that's a large percentage of them. And it brings me to a point. I'm going to talk about what Apple talked about before. This is probably going to be a long segment, so get comfortable. 200 million iOS devices. That is an incredible adoption rate. And it's something that Apple's competitors really need to look at and try to improve their own offerings. I'm looking at you, Android. I'm looking at you, Windows. You got to improve adoption of new OSs. Not only because of the features, not only because of, compatibility, but security. So important. So important. From a security standpoint. And I can't help but think that Google knows this. They know this. Google knows this. Microsoft knows this. The sad truth is that when Google signed up and jumped in with 2 feet, bought Android, released it, and the way that they released it, they knew that the carriers were going to have a lot of power. They knew that Verizon, they knew that T-Mobile, they knew that AT&T, they knew that Sprint, they knew that all the other carriers around the globe, O2, and, T-Mobile over there, and, Rogers, and all these different carriers, NTT, all these carriers would have a lot of control because that's the way they released it. So these carriers would put customizations on the OS. They would, they would do their own flavor of it. They would push it out when they were ready to do it. After they've tested it on the network with their customizations. The problem with that is that the consumer suffers because they have to wait and wait and wait and wait and wait for that latest Android OS. There's no cohesiveness there. And another problem is that the solution is not, it's not the ultimate solution. It's kind of a band-aid. People say, oh, just buy a Nexus. Well, if that's the case, why do you even have choice? Why even bother giving people a choice of what device to buy? That was the whole idea behind Android, right? Giving you a choice. If you're just going to say buy a Nexus, there's no choice. You might as well buy Apple. If that's the case, if you just want to go to one model all the time, one company. I thought that was the whole idea behind Android, was that you can get a Droid, or you can get an HTC, or that you can get a Sony branded Android device. And you're telling me that just get a Nexus. Well, that's not a good solution. Another solution people say, just flash the BIOS or flash the RAM. Flash the ROM. I'm going through all the terms. Flash the ROM. Get the Cyanogen. Get the latest one. Get the latest. Get it. Yeah, tell that to grandma. Tell that to grandpa. Tell that to your parents. That's why the adoption rate It's not, I mean, Apple's doing it right. I don't know what they're doing exactly, but they're doing it right. And I think these other companies can learn from it. So that was a big number that stood out for me in the beginning. 200 million iOS 6 devices, and it hasn't been out that long. That was a big number. They talked about the App Store reaching 35 billion downloads. 35 billion. Which is no surprise to me. App Store's been just kicking it everywhere, so that's not a surprise. Here's the surprise. The Mac. I'm talking about the Mac. OS 10 on the desktop. I'm not talking about tablets. I'm not talking about phones. We're talking about the desktop. The Mac is mentioned as taking the top spots in both notebooks and desktops across the United States. Now, somebody in my chat, when we were live streaming, started out when we first started. He says, Apple has really been struggling lately. And I was like, huh? I don't know which Apple you're watching, but I said, that's probably that's a perception thing. In reality, and it's kind of funny, I'm talking about reality and Apple at the same sentence. In reality, Apple's killing it. They are knocking it out of the park everywhere. It's like they can't do no wrong. I mean, when they messed up on the maps thing, people were like, oh, look at this, look at this. Apple finally made a mistake. They made a mistake. They made a mistake. Look, 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 look. Look at that, look at that, look at that, look at that. They've taken the top spot in both notebooks and desktops. I mean, I work for HP. That hurts. I didn't know that. I knew they did it and I knew they were top dog in notebooks. I didn't know they took desktops as well. I was like, oh, youch. And again, I don't speak for my employer. This is all coming from Buona. So on top of that announcement, riding on that statistic, they announced some new Macs. And the first Mac that they announced was a new 13-inch Retina MacBook Pro. And I may be getting these out of order. I did watch the keynote, but I may be getting the order that they announced it a little bit wrong. But they announced these 13-inch MacBook Pros Retina displays. The 15-inch is a very popular Retina display. The Retina display, you guys remember from I think it was September announcement, or it was a while ago. I'm not sure exactly when, but you remember the Retina display? They talk about packing pixels and doing all of this and doing all of that. Same is true, but they're putting it on the 13-inch MacBook, which is surprisingly, this is another surprise, it was their #1 selling Mac. Across the entire line of Macs, their #1 selling Mac was the 13-inch MacBook Pro. I was like, wow, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. So this was introduced. The next thing that was introduced was the iMac. And this is where I had a bad taste in my mouth. Because, they talked about how the iMac is killing its sales and all that stuff, which I knew. I knew it was killing. I knew it was selling well. But then they unveiled the new iMac and they showed a picture from a certain angle. And it really looked like the iMac was simply nothing more than a screen. It looks so thin. It looks thinner than your monitors, your flat panel monitors. It looked thinner than that from the angle that they were showing. And they were talking about how thin it is and how that. And everybody was like, oh, And even had one on the stage and it was like turned at a certain angle. And then they moved it. And then we saw this bulge in the back. And I'm like, oh, because I was even saying, where's the computer? How are you going to get the computer in there? That looks like a tablet with a stand. What the heck? What it is that they reduce the edges to be very, very thin. The guts in the middle of the computer are still kind of bulgy. And it was all smoke and mirrors, and I was shocked. I was shocked that they did that. Because I've watched a lot of Apple events. I've watched how they unveil products. I've watched how they've shown them. They literally always give you front, back, side, every different angle. And they hold it up, they show it to you. They let you touch it later on. But in this case, the unveiling was a complete deceit. I was like, oh man, They tried the trick. I even tweeted that. That's the thinnest iMac I've ever seen. And then later on, I was like, oh, they lied. But this new iMac's got some new specs. It's got some Ivy Bridge stuff, some more RAM. It's got a new Fusion Drive option, which is essentially a hybrid drive with a flash and a spinning hard drive combined. These have been out a while, but they've given them a name, Fusion Drive, and lots of other cool things. New form factor, same price. So it's a strong offering. I just didn't like the presentation. I was like, oh, man. You guys. You guys. Apple also revamped the Mac Mini. So they gave it a processor bump. It now has Ivy Bridge, i5, i7 options. Same price. Essentially, that's pretty much all they did. I think they updated the Wi-Fi and some other things. And it even has a FireWire port. And I was like, ooh, FireWire on the Mac Mini. Yes. Yes. And they talked about these iBooks. I think this was earlier in it. They talked about how the iBooks were doing very, very well. The Books app was doing very well. And they announced this Books Author program, a free program, very cool, which will allow you to author your own books. And the cool thing about this is that they give you tools to do a lot of powerful things in education. Like they give the instructors the ability to embed their own fonts and, you know, embed their own mathematical formulas and things like that to really customize the experience and keep it up to date. I think they gave some number like 2,500 schools in the United States are using books for their the Books app for their textbooks. So this Books Authors program, and there's also an iBook update today on the App Store. Now, the part that everybody was waiting on was not coming, but we got some kind of surprise here. There was a new iPad, and it wasn't the iPad Mini. No, it wasn't the iPad Mini, but there was a new iPad. The iPad 4th generation, which shocked me, shocked the web, shocked just about everybody watching. They came out with a brand new iPad. Now, mind you, the quote-unquote new iPad is probably less than a year old. I think it's 6 months old. I think it came out in March. And that's not that long ago, because I got one. I bought it at launch. That was my first iPad. And I was like, all right, time for me to jump in and get a tablet. They got a new iPad. They revamped it. It now has a new processor, the A6X chip. It now has different connectors. It now has better Wi-Fi. It now has some other little things, which are essentially a gut of the system. They've updated all the internals, and they've called it the iPad 4th generation. So on the outside, it's going to look exactly the same. But here's the kicker. In their iPad lineup, the new iPad is gone. I don't think a lot of people noticed that. They have the iPad 2, and they have this iPad, this 4th generation. The new iPad is no more. So the iPad that I bought is no longer being sold. But the iPad 2 is. Something to think about. So now let's talk about the grand finale, the big kahuna, what everybody was coming to see, the iPad Mini. The iPad Mini is a 7-inch screen iPad, pretty much what everybody expected. The rumor sites nailed everything down to the last drop. This iPad Mini, they touted that the screen size is 1024 by 68. And they basically compared it to a Nexus 7 and said that you get more screen real estate and it's thinner and lighter than the Nexus 7. And they compared it to other tablets, not really other tablets, but they compared other features as well. It's got a lightning connector, some other things, available from 16 gigabyte all the way up to 64. Now, 64 gigabyte configurations of many tablets aren't available with other vendors. I mean, this is the first 64 gigabyte model I have seen, both available in Wi-Fi and with cellular access. So, how much does it cost? We were joking around in the chat, and I was like, all right, guys, let's guess the price. And people were like, okay. it's going to be $350. And I was like, nope, it's going to be $299. $299 is the price that they have to set. I'm going to stand by it. It's going to be $299. I kept saying it, $299. People are like, well, it might be $150. And I'm like, well, if it's $150, I'm buying one. And I'm not even in the market for one. It's not going to be that cheap. I was like, $299, $299, $299. Price came out $329. And I said, no. An extra $30 changes so much. An extra, I'm telling you, if it was $299, what I'm about to say wouldn't have been said. Their stock price dropped 10% right after that. It was like, it just plummeted. The number one complaint after that announcement was not anything. It wasn't anything to do with the iPad mini itself. It was the price. I was on GDGT gadget site, and they said the exact same thing I said. They said at $299, this would have been a no-brainer. But now, that extra $30 is just $30. That extra $30 has got people thinking twice. Because they look at the Nexus 7, they go, wow, that's $250 for the 16 gigabyte model. And they're going to look at that. And they're going to compare it to the iPad mini. Go, all right, it's got this, it's got that. Then this has GPS, the iPad mini doesn't. This has a higher resolution, the iPad mini doesn't. This, they're going to do that on top of the price. And well, the iPad has maybe a better form factor. It has this, it has that. It has the iTunes app. It has App Store. It has all these other things. But $30. If it's a $50 difference, if it was just a $50 difference, you could argue that the back camera was enough. You could literally argue that. You could put that up against a Nexus 7, an iPad mini, 16 gigabyte configuration, Wi-Fi, and say, okay, the iPad mini has a back camera. So that's probably worth $50, right? Do you need a back camera? They'd be like, yeah, a back camera would be nice. But no, it's $80 now. And it ain't worth that much. It's amazing what $30 can do, guys. And I can't help but think that this is a mistake from my perspective, my limited perspective. But Apple, I mean, I saw this on Google's finance website that the iPad mini may be priced at $329 due to profit margins. That based on the parts, the amount of the how much the parts cost, in order to maintain their current profit margins, it would have to be priced at least at $329. They put that at the bottom. And it makes sense. I mean, that's the way Apple makes money, guys. That's how they do things. They don't necessarily sell as much as their competitors, but they make a ton of money. And I mentioned this during my live stream, and I'm going to mention again. Apple could come in third place or even fourth place in everything and still succeed. So when people say Apple is failing or Apple's going to die or Apple's going to do this and Apple's going to do that, no, Apple's not going anywhere because they don't have to be number one to succeed. And that's a point that a lot of people don't know. That's, the people who hate Apple, they probably know it. That's why they hate them so much, because their profit margins are large enough to where they make a killing even with less sales. This may go along with the argument that Apple, stuff is overpriced, which is debatable because people pay for different things. Some people pay for specs only. Some people pay for experience and ecosystem, which some people laugh at that, like our ecosystem and experience. I just want the fastest processor and the best screen. To each his own. But I can't help but think, after all the great things that Apple announced today that I talked about, and even with me, the last thing I'm going to remember is that price of the iPad mini, that $30 difference. $30 could have made a 500,000 sales. I'm willing to bet that 500,000 people will not pre-order this because of $30. Apple may be able to live with that. The profit margins may offset that. But for my little tiny brain, I'm like, no, just make it $2.99. Take the hit, take the loss. I don't run companies, so I can only say so much, guys. Check out this event roundup, Apple iPad mini event roundup. I got /gear.com link, but it's all over the internet. The Verge has it, Mac Rumors has it, Slashdot, and Gadget. Yeah, Gadget has it. Everybody has it. Their own version of roundups. What happened today? Man, what a day! What a day! The iPad mini is here. Nexus, Kindle Fire, Galaxy Tabs now have another player in that market.
You found Bwana.org Radio. Tech news and tech gadgets for the hardcore geek in all of us.
And for our next story, we're going to continue talking about this idea of specifications. And you may have heard me quip a little bit there, talking about how some people buy things for specs, which I don't have a problem with. But sometimes the specs don't make a difference. And that's what this article over on /gear is talking about. A 1080p smartphone display, according to a study, offers no visual difference over 720p. Huh. Who would have knew? Dr. Raymond Soneria, president and CEO of DisplayMate, you may have heard of them. They produce calibration software for various displays. Says that most people won't be able to notice the difference between a smartphone with 720p display, and one with 1080p. This is simply because photos and videos are spread over multiple pixels anyway. So they will likely look a little blurred in a way, no matter how high the resolution is. And this is something that I talk about all the time in terms of video, and even when streaming games, is that, you know, the source media really makes a difference as to what you're viewing and perceiving. If you got a game running at 1024 by 768 and your stream is at 720p, why? It doesn't. Things are gonna scale down and up, and things are gonna be blurry in some cases. You know, it's not gonna make a difference. This is why certain people on Twitch TV stream at 1080p when they shouldn't be even doing that. 720p and 1080p, a lot of times people cannot tell the difference. The way you tell the difference is if you have a native 1080p monitor and you go full screen and you go, oh, it looks great. But what percentage of people are going to do that? If you're running a stream, ask your viewers. How many of you have a 1080p native monitor and you go full screen when you watch me? I guarantee it's going to be a small percentage. And I guarantee you probably should rethink. I guarantee you are going to rethink streaming at a lower resolution. The same is true with the 720p, 1080p. If you're comparing products, if it's a Nexus tablet or, I don't know, iPad mini, whatever, and one says 720p and one says 1080p, and you go, oh, I got to get the 1080p. Don't say that. You don't have to get the 1080p because you're probably not going to tell the difference. You're not going to tell the difference. The trained eye can barely tell the difference. The same is true for frame rates. A lot of people can't tell the difference between 30 frames per second and 60 frames per second. I can, because I've been studying and doing this stuff for years, and I can tell a 60 frames per second live stream over a 30 frames per second simply because my eye is trained to that. But most people aren't going to care, or even, you know, they're not going to tell or even care. So when you battle over these specs, you know, when you look at the iPad mini, you look at other products that you're, you know, TVs and stuff, just know that some of them aren't going to even matter. Especially when it comes to 720p versus 1080p. Now, people are going to say, oh, I go 1080p or nothing because I've seen 1080p and I can't go back to 720. I say Bologna. Bologna. That's my way of saying baloney. Bologna. There's not that much difference, guys. Check it out. /gear.com has the details. 1080p smartphone displays offer no visual difference over 720p. And for our final story, we're going to take a little bit of a twist and talk about a movie. An upcoming movie. I thought it was a geek out movie. Iron Man 3. Always a geek's dream. If you go see Iron Man movies, you know that it has all kinds of cool interfaces, and insane technology capabilities that we can't do today. But if they were to happen, we'd be like, wow, that's really, really cool. But this is a link to a teaser, trailer of a teaser. But the actual trailer did come out today. So if you search YouTube for the actual trailer, you can see more and more of it. Lots of cool things in here, guys. You can see some Google goggles type influence stuff where Tony Stark has this little device on his head. And he's like sticking out his hand and calling things to his hand and basically calling his suit to his body. I'm like, oh, that's kind of scary and kind of cool at the same time. He's going to have a lot of different abilities. So if you're into this kind of stuff, and I know you are, because I am, and I talk about it here all the time, this movie's going to be a must-see. It looks even better than Iron Man 2. I didn't even watch Iron Man 2 until like recently, like a couple months ago, because I had no desire to see it. The trailer didn't entice me enough, and you know, I saw what it was about, and I was like, I'll wait to the video. I'll wait till Netflix or Amazon or whatever. But this one, I actually want to physically go to the theater and watch. It looks as good as Avengers. I'm not going to say it is better than Avengers, because that would be blasphemy. You shall not say anything is better than Avengers without first having seen it first and having a 3-month quiet period of analysis. Check it out, guys. Iron Man 3, the new trailer's out. Geeky goodness. And you can check it out. The teaser trailer on /gear, but the actual full trailer is out today. All right, guys, that concludes our show, episode 252 of Buona.org Radio. I want to thank everybody for listening. We are going to be posting this to YouTube the same way we did 251. It was posted to YouTube in an audio-only format. So if you follow me on my YouTube channel at youtube.com/iobeffa, it will be there. Also, of course, it'll be at radio.buona.org. I am still working on the iTunes feed, so give me a little time. I'm trying to work out the kinks and to see what exactly is wrong with my current feed, because I did change feed URLs, and I'm trying to get everything to update. Follow me on Twitter, guys, twitter.com/Buona. If you heard my story about app.net, I'm also on app.net/Buona. I cross-post sometimes there from app.net to Twitter, but not the other way around. If I post something on Twitter, it won't go to app.net. Also, follow me on Google+. I discuss a lot of tech there as well. Google.com/+Buona. That's Google.com/+Buona. My live stream is at live.buona.tv. We stream games. We talk about games. We talk about tech now. A lot more now that I've started up this podcast. Live.buona.tv is your one-stop shop for everything Buona and tech and gaming. All right, guys, that concludes episode 252, and I will see you next time.